Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Every so often, there's like a new thing we're all supposed to be doing so we don't get left behind. Blogs, social media, content strategy, digital transformation, which never ends. Now, of course, we've got AI. Look, each one arrived with its own wave of urgency, its own consultants, its own experts, pitches, newsletters, spam, and more. But somewhere in there, we also apparently decided we needed podcasts, which, okay, sure, get the irony. Here I am. But the thing is, look, in the scramble toward all that shiny new stuff, we kept forgetting something important. We kept forgetting what we already knew. All that accumulated expertise, those hard-won lessons, the institutional memory baked into the bones of an organization or an individual, maybe. We just sort of left it in a box somewhere, labeled it archive, and moved on. Maybe that's fine. Or maybe that's actually the most expensive mistake enterprises are making right now, especially as they race to stuff AI into everything. AI is only as good as what you feed it. Garbage in, garbage out. Everybody knows this. So what happens when you've spent 30 years letting your history rot in a filing cabinet? What does your AI actually know about who you are? Well, my guest today has spent the better part of 3 decades helping some of the world's most enduring enterprises answer exactly that question. Not as a philosophy exercise, but as a business imperative. He and his company just launched a first-of-its-kind AI platform purpose-built to turn institutional memory into live, citable enterprise intelligence. Fortune 500s are already in beta. A rarity this day and age, he came up inside one single company, one employer. He learned the craft from its founder and eventually succeeded him. He runs his own podcast on business history, which means he spent years thinking about how the past explains the present before AI made that a competitive necessity. We're going to dig into what organizations are actually throwing away in this AI sprint and what it really takes to make institutional memory work for you, not someday, but now. So please welcome to the Trending Communicator, for the first time, the CEO of History Factory and my friend, Jason Dressel. Jason, how you doing?
Dan.
What's going on?
Great to see you, my friend. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Huge fan of this podcast. And also congratulations. So in the spirit of history, hopefully one day, years from now, I'll be able to say that I was on a podcast with the great Dan Nessel the same week that he launched LilyPath with his co-founders. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And yes, it's a historic week for you, and really, really psyched to be here. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Listen, thank you, sir. I mean, listeners will be actually kind of hearing that in somewhat of a historical context because this is going to probably air a few months from now.
That's right.
So by the time they listen, LilyPath will be a household name, I am sure. However, thank you very much. It has been incredible to be involved in a startup, to try to found my own thing. And it's all grows out of communications, out of where I started, the things I have done in communications, where I gravitated toward with communications plus AI. And it kind of almost happened organically where, LilyPath is this kind of culmination of executive positioning meets AI. And it all starts on LinkedIn for now, but it's, makes a lot of sense to me. I hope it makes sense to everybody else out there who is willing to give it a shot and give us some good patronage. Yeah,
absolutely. No, it's exciting. It clearly fits a clear need in the market, and wishing you all the luck.
Well, thank you, man. I mean, and it brings in mind, and there's a lot of stuff I want to ask you about. Well, everything. I mean, people are probably wondering, not our friends, of course, in Page and in PRS, all the people who already know Jason Dressel, but a lot of people are probably wondering, History Factory, how's that in the communication space? And we'll get there. It's clearly a comms company, or actually it's a lot more than that. But it's very understandable. And also, we've all kind of gotten to this weird place where we don't even know what our jobs are anymore, because we're making it up not making it up as we go, but we're sort of building the plane in mid-flight. And I don't know if there's a accurate description of what a a CEO does anymore, of what a comms guy does. And in my case, I mean, it's been brilliant. I love it. I like having a career identity crisis on purpose. But it's disconcerting for a lot of people. And, it certainly is changing the way that we have to kind of approach the future. But your company, History Factory, or I should say History Factory, there's no the, correct? Right.
There used to be a the. It was part of a rebrand. That was the conclusion of a very long, exhaustive rebrand process. Was we dropped the
to drop the, it's a the problem for real. Like it's
that's right.
It's but it's tempting because we've been inculcated with the History Channel and the history this and that. But History Factory, is doing some incredible things. But we're all in this kind of space where we're taking AI and communications and marketing, kind of mushing them together, and we're building. I like to say, hey, I'm building now, making things.
Yeah.
And you at History Factory are no different. So I want to start there in a way. I mean, I guess so. History Factory, you say you start with the future and work back.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
our future
philosophy.
right now. That's your thing. That's where we are now. We're starting with it. That's it. In a lot of ways, that's what we do when we try to build things, build apps, or do whatever we're doing. So, most people think of history as like a backward looking thing. So tell me all about this. Start with the future and work back, because I get it, but I don't know if my listeners do. And I certainly want to hear you talk about it.
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, History Factory, our vision is to empower the world's best enterprises to be able to get infinite use out of their history to drive their missions forward. That's our whole sort of purpose and compass north. And we can't do that without starting with the future and working back. We have to understand who our clients are today and where they're going. Yeah. And start with the future and work back, quite simply. You can think about it maybe in two different contexts. The first is literally how we think about how we revisit and reimagine their history, given who they are today and where they're going. Certainly for the clients that we work with, if you were to go back to the beginning, to your point, you would never get here. You would never be able to make it to today's organization. It's too big. It's too complex. There's been too much change. There's been too much innovation. And our clients, like nations in a sense, they're kind of like nation states in that they have these kind of sort of unifying myths. And those myths and stories have to be adapted and changed over time as the organization grows and changes, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how we think about history in the context of starting with the future and working back. A great example of that is just an example of what that looks like would be Deloitte. I don't know how many people in business under the age of 40 think of Deloitte as an accounting firm.
Right.
But Deloitte, probably spent 2 decades changing that perception that they are a big accounting firm. And when you look at their founder, William Deloitte, an Englishman who founded the firm in, I think, 1845, and I hope I'm getting that right. He was an accountant.
I'm sure we'll find it.
He was a very competent accountant, and he was in fact one of the leaders and creators of the field. So when we help Deloitte talk about William Deloitte as an example, we don't change the fact that he was an accountant, but we talk about how his impact on accountant helped improve the management of the companies that he worked on. We help them talk about the diverse set of large organizations that he worked with. We talk about the impact he had in his community in England, which is now a community that has a large Southeast Asian population. So we're finding ways to broaden and reinterpret how we position the history in the context of, obviously, Deloitte now being the largest professional services firm in the world and a very broad platform of management and consulting and technology.
Yeah.
The other side of Start with the Future and Work Back is not only how we're approaching history itself, but how we're thinking about, again, how we're thinking about using it, right? And so if an organization is coming to us and they are thinking tactically about what they want to do with their history, we're challenging that thinking based on what they're trying to accomplish, who their audiences are, and what makes sense for their company and brand. This past year, we had a really big traveling experience that we did with Caterpillar for their 100th anniversary. And it went to something like 32 countries. And it was this really massive scale mobile experience of telling their story. And why did we do it that way? Well, it needed to be big because Caterpillar is big and their products are big, and it needed to be hands-on and it needed to be in person. And so we wanted to have a solution that really met, the need of the brand, the culture, and what they were trying to accomplish from a business perspective. So that, in a small way, is what Start with the Future and Work Back looks like.
I also imagine that it's not it's not unlike having starting with a theory, starting with a hypothesis, and then kind of going and doing the research. Because if you think about it, you're working with a company like Deloitte, and I do remember Touche and Tomatsu, by the way, but you're working with a company like Deloitte. You've got, what is it, 150, like 180 years of history, roughly. I mean, how many boxes is that? Like, how many archives is that? And you walk into a project and you think, okay, I need to look at the history of this company to understand where we're going with no further instruction. Where do you start? Like, how do you, I don't think you can. Like, that's why you need that strategic vision. You need to understand where the company is now to kind of give you those guardrails.
There's no question. It's incredible how our team is able to find what we call the golden nuggets and to do the research to surface that. It is needles in a haystack at scale. And the ability to sift through that content is obviously a craft, and it's a skill set, and it's the work that our archivists, our researchers, our historians do with our creative team to bring those kinds of stories to life. Not to dig into the Deloitte story too much, but just as an example of that, since you set it up so nicely, Dan, one of the great discoveries of working with Deloitte initially on that campaign was we actually found a partner agreement that was up for auction in an auction house in London. And so it was literally finding a rare document, a document that was one of the original documents that literally was the origin of them being a partnership. And we found it outside of the organization. And so those kinds of things happen all the time.
Yeah. It's astounding to me that companies, especially large organizations that have a lot of history, as it were, that they don't dig into it more, that they don't go there. Like there's a blocker, I suppose, in the mind that it's okay, it's not valuable, or it's like, yeah, it would be nice. But, I think about the Japanese companies I've worked with, they all have a very keen sense of history. I would not say that they are using their own assets, historical assets, in the ways that are future facing or in ways to support their current vision or their story, or, they're not searching for nuggets that they can repurpose and so on. But they have the bones, right? They make museums. Big companies, they have museums all over. You go to Japan, you go to the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Museum in 17 different cities or something like that. It's crazy.
Right.
But that's where it ends, right? They're like, hey, we're taking care of our history. We recognize it.
Right.
What is it that moves them from this kind of virtuous recognition of their own history to let's act on our history?
Well, not all organizations do, I think, to your
Mm-hmm.
point. But I think that there's a few different, there's not a single answer to that, both in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what they do, how they do it, and why they do it.
Yeah.
But I'll answer the question as best I can, and
Maybe I could,
introduce.
maybe I
All
should
right,
sort of
I'm happy to
hone
answer
it.
and introduce some new
No,
ones.
hone
But
it
go
in
ahead.
just a little bit. Like it's
Yeah.
the same question, but
Yeah.
think of it in terms of like how does a CEO come around? Like how
Right.
does the executive come around that to the point
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
know we have to do different things?
Well, interestingly enough, the CEO is typically the easiest who's already on board, because unlike most other, really more so than anyone else in the organization, the CEO is thinking intergenerationally. They are typically, particularly in the large organizations we work with, they are thinking in the context of stewardship. They're thinking in the context typically of wanting to leave this organization stronger than they left it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's a subtext that they may also be thinking about legacy. But CEOs are not thinking in the context of the day-to-day and teams and resources and budgets. So the CEO is not the hardest to have to make those business cases with,
Mm-hmm.
because they
Yeah.
understand strategically the value, and understand the importance of the organization sort of staying tethered to its identity and what has enabled it to get to this point. I think with other leaders, the business case is more tactical. It is more around, specific KPIs around, brand or culture or cost efficiencies or reduction of risk. And history, heritage, and archives, can be aligned with any of those types of business cases. And it often is something that happens that is a unpleasant experience. It might
Mm-hmm.
be a litigation event in which they had a hard time finding evidence, or were in a litigation situation because they didn't have the supporting documentation that they needed around an IP matter. It might be a product launch. So it typically is an event that occurs where they see the need, understand why they needed it. And then, as I say, it's kind of then afterwards, like, when we were kids, and, this is kind of a dark analogy, but it's like when we were kids and they had the missing children on the milk box, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of like how I would kind of say to the team, I'm like, well, unfortunately now we have to now kind of go back and show them the milk box and be like, we don't want this to happen again.
Yeah.
We need to go back in and we need to make sure that you're preserving your history to preserve. And so you're not in this situation again.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's a tough event, like someone passes away and they didn't capture institutional memory. But then a lot of times it is a more sort of tactical, situational, something that happens like a product launch.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of things that drive the need. But even when that need is driven, one of the challenges though is they tend to be very kind of using it in the moment. And there's a distinction of using that history and heritage as a narrative device, as something that's ornamental, that's being supported, in a campaign, or to your point about companies in Japan, versus really thinking about history and heritage as a driver of institutional memory, data, and, essentially operational infrastructure.
Mm. It's almost so. It sounds a lot like sometimes it's compliance driven or a crisis driven or something like this. And you did mention event driven, tactically, like anniversaries and so on, right? That's when they
Yeah,
want to go and look in
for
their
sure.
archives or find out what's in that old room they never go into. But like if so okay, so if it's driven that way. And it starts that way with a company, right? They're like, okay, fine. History Factory, they're the people to call. They're going to come check out our archives. They're going to pull out all the stories and narratives and a lot of other good stuff that are going to help us either with this litigation or make a splash with the product or, remind everybody why we've been around for 175 years. Whatever the goal is. Where does that moment happen when they make that kind of the aha that, holy cow, we have, so much rich material here. We can do something. It's unique to us. It's ours.
Right.
We don't have to go hard. Like when do they make this decision?
It's a great question. It varies obviously from case to case, but more often than not, it does start with them going through that journey that you just described, Dan, and then it's a realization that they do have this repository of content that is completely unique to them. It is the inventory of their experience, as we call it, and it is fundamentally all the things that are the memories and content that they can use that drive all the things that make them different and explain who they were at any given time. And so more often than not, most of the archival programs that we build and manage, most of the time they are programs that we built from the ground up. Not all the time. We have helped organizations modernize existing longstanding archives programs. It's interesting too, people don't realize, but back when you look back in the, 1950s, 60s, 70s, big companies had big archival departments. And the reason why, of course, was that the world was a lot more analog, right? And so you had these archival, just like companies back then had full libraries. And so as the world went digital, there's been a bit of a disconnect on what archives is, why it matters, how it is different than, for example, records management or digital asset management, or, sort of a subtext of knowledge management. But all of these disciplines are essentially all rooted in the same work of helping organizations make sure that they're capturing, preserving, and enabling access to information. And the value of archives is specifically holding on to the history and the materials that should have enduring value to an organization over their entire life cycle, right?
Yeah.
And so once they go through that process and once they see the impact of that kind of experience and those kinds of campaigns or storytelling or, whatever the experience may be, it gets a lot easier for them to understand why there's a lot of value in this. And certainly proportionally, it's, a minimal investment.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a company, and you don't have to give names, but have you ever seen a company that goes through an exercise, no matter how it begins, whether it begins for good reason or for, save my ass reasons? Have you ever seen
That's
a company
a good reason.
They're all legitimate reasons, right? Have you ever seen them go through this process and go, holy crap, we're wrong about ourselves. We need to change our brand, our values, our mission, our vision. Does it ever get that far? Have you ever seen any kind of drastic change like this? Yeah.
Yes. And we have. And it's interesting because a lot of times, and this is a great kind of example of what we're talking about. Typically when we work with an organization for the first time, and we'll take your example of brand identity, they will often come to us after that work has been done. And what they're really looking for us to do now is to show the receipts. They want us to now do show the long hand of the math and show that it all works out. And yes, we are this thing that we say that we are. And we've had experiences where we've had to say, you're not that. And I'll give an old example because it won't get me in any sort of trouble whatsoever, which was we were brought in by Craftsman, the tool brand,
The tool company, yeah.
a long time ago.
When they were still
When they were still with Sears, in fact, yeah. It was a Sears created brand. And they wanted to position and I'll blame this on the ad agency in part, but they wanted to basically position Craftsman as this like super kind of superior tool. And anyone who understands anything about the tool market knows the Craftsman is not. It's a do it yourself home product.
Yeah.
No one's on and they had like campaigns of like, astronauts on the moon with Craftsman tools. And like, I hope NASA's not taking, Craftsman to the moon or whatever. So that's an example of that kind of discordance. But often then what happens through that process, and this has become increasingly more common for us because we've now been around for nearly 50 years. Once a client goes through that experience with us, they get it and they say, I realize we did this completely backwards. We have to come to you first to understand the insights, understand where we've been to help inform that. So it's a great question, and there has been that shift. But yeah, there's been a number of times where we've discovered that there's just a fundamental discordance between how they're positioning themselves and really who they are and who they've been.
Like, it just seems to me that it would be almost it should be a prerequisite for a big change management exercise that the first thing you do is know who you are, know who you're going to be, what your company is going to change into. And is that a realistic change given who you've been? It is a company after all. There is nothing preventing a company from shedding their old skin and doing something completely different and reinventing.
Right.
It's a lot harder, I think, than for larger companies, and certainly, it's never been an easy task. But for the vast majority of organizations, people join, your employees come on board. They're there for whatever reason they're there for, but generally speaking, they're on board with you'd hope they're on board with your mission, vision, values. They're on board with, what you represent. They're not unhappy to carry your brand around on their LinkedIn profile or in their car, wherever they are. And so, even if it's a little blasé, at least they're not negative about it. So along comes a history factory looking at the archives and says, you guys want to change. What do you do about the employees then? Because remember, they're all associated with this, who you are. And if you're having an identity crisis, what is the effect on them? So, how closely are you working with, working as an internal comms team with change management to make these changes happen?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the first audience that is going to call BS on you is going to be your internal people, because they know that it doesn't pass the sniff test, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly where it begins. And a lot of the work we'll start with, engaging those groups and actually, uncovering and unearthing their stories and perspectives, for exactly that reason. Mm-hmm. It's interesting too what you touch on, because, I was thinking, when you think about the big companies that we tend to work with and the kinds of organizations where you've spent some of your career, Dan, they all go through these sort of moments of their life cycle, right? Mm-hmm. They have the founding era. Sometimes the founding era, results in, explosive growth. But in many cases, they have the founding era, and the founding era may last for 20 or 30 years. And then often it's the second generation that kind of builds on that infrastructure, professionalizes it, builds in, scale and systems and processes. And then, there's that kind of hyper growth period. And then eventually, what happens, right? They hit a period, that is called stall out, right? They stop growth. And then what typically happens, right? They either stall out and they never return to the level of performance they had. Or what generally happens, there's a moment of reflection. There's a moment of, we've lost our way, right? And that is kind of what this is about. Two pieces of work that I talk about often are Bain's founders mentality work that talks about, the influence of founders and talks about why companies that are led by founders tend to outperform those that don't, and the attributes that those companies stay tethered to, whether their founder is still there or not. And some new work that John Awada, who we both, of course, know, he's done it at Yale, is called Refounding. And he's talked about that in the context of, some of the challenges that companies like Boeing and Nike and I believe Starbucks have had, and how, some of those organizations, obviously in the case of Starbucks, they've had to bring their founder back a couple times now, right?
Yeah.
And so this is all connected to what you're talking about in terms of staying tethered to what made you unique and important to society in the first place, and not straying away from that.
Yeah. I mean, the process of digging into all that, even in, going through the archives, or putting on your library science hat, or, digging in and just kind of asking the right questions, Scoop Jackson style, and talking to the right people. I know I'm dating myself there with Scoop Jackson. We're probably even dating before myself. I'm sorry. Just came to mind. Jason Dressel in a pork pie hat. Scoop Dressel. I'd love to see that. But you go in there and you're talking to people. Along comes technology, right? So you have been around for 50 years. I mean, the company has, History Factory has a history, and in that time, you have seen your work move from, like, I'm guessing here, but I suppose it's from digging through boxes and microfiche, and maybe you still do some of that, all the way up through to the company archives are all on these 3 hard drives, et cetera, or more, right? And now, of course, with all the public information that's been out on the internet for 20, almost 30 years, right? I mean, think of, in many cases, some of your archives are,
the first corporate websites basically all launched in 1995. That's when they all launched. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. I tried to buy Nestle.com in 1996. Nestle, right?
Yeah.
I was going up against the big boys.
Yeah.
Back in those days when you thought that buying a domain was your surefire way to get billions of dollars in a hurry.
Yeah.
But I digress. So they've been on the web now for 30 years. So if they've been around for 30 years, then there is an external archive that's been built that they're not in control of necessarily. There's a lot of information. You know what I'm going to say, because every episode has something about this, but I'm going to just put up those 2 little letters. AI most certainly changes the game here.
Yeah.
So you've got this capability now for somebody to do research on a company and believe that they get the whole picture because they got 30 years of stuff out there on them.
Right.
And that's a lot of context. That's a lot of context for any of the LLMs now, especially with the way they are, to parse through and come up with some really reasonable and interesting kind of conclusions. But those AI or the LLMs don't have the access to the internal stuff. A lot of it's not digitized, but even if it's digitized, it's not out there for training material. So here comes History Factory, and you have a very interesting solution to all this. I promised I would hold back a little bit on it, but I want to say I love Chronicle. I think your concept is amazing. And let me just wax a little bit here because it's Chronicle. First of all, I like the way you spelled it with Q, like CHRONIQLE, Chronicle, right? Did I get that right? CHRONIQLE. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. I like it so much because my listeners know that I've been focused on essentially doing something similar for an individual, for getting into the intellectual archaeology you have to do to dig into your past, and then scoop that all into a very into a certain types of AI governed closed systems, so that you are able to then mine that information, which is your information, which is not like manufactured or made up by some AI, but you can proudly use it and claim it because it is yours. Use that for your current and present and future content. Very simple. Like, that's the simple way of saying it all. Here you come, and I was explaining this to you before you told me about Chronicle, and you're just like, I think I'm working on something that's a little bit similar, but for a brand and for a company and for something with history. So I love Chronicle. I love the ideas that I love the way that you are implementing it. Why don't we start off, tell us about like why you went this direction? Not that we haven't already covered a little bit, but
sure,
what it's all about, where we're going with it, and so on.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you. And it's an incredibly exciting new chapter of History Factory, and we are incredibly excited about the platform and its potential. Because after all, I am representing History Factory and history. I'll take a little bit of a meandering route on this, which is I'll come back to our vision is to make history infinitely useful for our clients. And this is really, interestingly enough, and you and I talked about this a bit on our podcast, the History Factory podcast. We talked about this kind of in the sort of context of the history of disruptive technologies. And so, as you noted, I've been at History Factory a long time. I joined History Factory in 1999 when the internet was still very much sort of solidifying as a disruptive technology. And I certainly, learned a lot from that process. And the way our team came together around this was very consistent with how we have embraced previous technologies. And essentially, to your point, the challenges with AI are, it is, as you said before a while ago, it's kind of garbage in and garbage out. Mm-hmm. And I think we're all learning the incredible power of what AI can offer, but we're also pretty quickly learning the shortcomings, right?
Yeah.
And again, when you kind of compare it to the early era of the internet, there was this excitement about the World Wide Web and, people getting, websites posted up and listservs. And then pretty quickly organizations said, wait, we can't do this. We have to leverage and deploy this technology, but we need to wield it in different ways that serve our purposes. One of which was, we need security, we need privacy. And so that, created the concept of an intranet, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing a very similar dynamic now, obviously, with AI. We very quickly went from how people are using these LLMs in a external environment to now how organizations and individuals are essentially now embracing and creating more closed loop solutions. And so the way we're looking at that is a few different things. And there's there's a few different layers to your question and the points you raise. First and foremost, there is the issue that AI is inherently biased based on what is represented on the web. And so that bias is, it can be cultural, it can be geographic, it can be ethnicity, and it can certainly be time. Mm-hmm. And so from a historical perspective, the internet is inherently biased toward content that's digital. And so it is essentially scraping information that is available on the internet.
Right.
The second piece of that, and to your point, companies do not have all of their archival or historical information or data writ large externally. They have it internally. So AI is not going to be accessing that. I think the second piece of that is that the data itself is not easily readable. And so that's where you're seeing all these issues with hallucination, confabulation, the accuracy issues that we're seeing with AI is not just a inability for it to access the scope and breadth of information that it should be accessing because it's not available. It's also because the technology is not yet there where it can actually effectively read data that is in those kinds of formats.
Yeah.
And so essentially what Chronicle is solving for are those barriers. It is a platform that is leveraging the power and speed that we all love about AI, and it's solving for the lack of trust and the concerns about inaccuracy and hallucination and confabulation by essentially a very defined curation process of the actual information that we are putting into the platform, but also the process we're using to do that. So it is not at all a parallel to, just an organization that has like an internal, chat GPT or Gemini or Claude, and then you're just like setting up, specific custom, GPTs or agents. It's a process for literally how we're structuring the data from this information and breaking it down and feeding it into the AI platform so that it's clean data. And, and back to the idea of kind of garbage in and garbage out, we're putting in really clean, verified, accurate content. And we've also essentially trained it to function like a consultant and a historian to some degree. So it is able to essentially provide more context, which I think is another issue that we're all seeing with AI, is it's not great at context. Very, very few technologies are. And so we've also trained it through essentially broader research bases of content, of history, of information at our disposal. So it's a platform that is really functioning like nothing else we've seen in the market, both in terms of the data that it's pulling from, how it's able to read that information, and how it's been trained to perform.
If you're a communicator, marketer inside one of these companies, like what are the use cases for Chronicle? What would you be using it for?
Well, you can use it for anything as simple and as tactical as social media campaigns. Great. It's March, it's Women's History Month, and we need to quickly pull together some insights and research on women from the history of our organization and from our local, communities and regions where we operate that we want to be able to celebrate. And it can do all the things that, that incredible AI can do, give me that content of, people from 1980, give me people from 1970, it can break down that information and slice it and dice it in all the ways. You can use it for much more sort of strategic initiatives around, evaluating, when you've gone into different markets, what were the drivers of that? How has your product evolved over time? And because it's connected in some cases with our clients' archives, and it's important to note, Chronicle is a tool that you don't have to have an archives to actually be able to use. But if you do have an actual archives, it can access those materials. So one of the really great things about it is you can actually also access imagery directly in the tool. So one of our clients who's in beta, one of the things they were really excited about, they are in the midst of launching their next 5-year strategic plan. And as part of that process, a question came up with their senior leadership, and they said, when did we start doing this? When did we start the process of having a 5-year strategic plan? It feels like we've always done this, but surely there was a start to this, and no one knew. And we have their archives. They had checked the archives. We actually, even using the archival tools at our disposal, were not easily able to find that information. But then we used Chronicle, or I should say the client used Chronicle, and they were able to find that. And they were actually able to confirm that their 5-year strategic planning process started in 1971, and they were able to go back, and then they were able to trace it and find the evolution of their strategic planning. And then they found some things from the strategic planning process early on that they wanted to pull forward and implement and integrate into how they do it now. So there's infinite examples of how you can use it, just like there's infinite examples of how you can use any AI tool.
It's
it really
basically
comes back
like
to
it's a chat bot, right? I mean, it looks it is the interface.
Yeah, I mean, its interface is functioning exactly like
you
essentially
chat with it in
Gemini or
natural language.
We designed it so that it's very intuitive for folks who know how to use an AI tool, an LLM. So it's really cool. We're really excited about it, and it's especially good because of the things I mentioned at being able to read data that's coming out of complex data structures. So, for instance, pulling content out of annual reports, infographics, legal materials, board minutes, company newsletters, employee magazines, all those kinds of sort of narrative text rich documents that sort of out of the box AI is not great at being able to accurately decipher. That's really where it's performing at a very high level.
I think if I had it handy for some of the companies I worked for, I'd be like, I need you to create a simulacrum, a avatar, as it were, not a deep fake, but I want you to, or a persona per se, but take all the CEOs of this company from here until history and just create like a Betty Crocker, like your amalgamated CEO, right? And now I'm going to bounce ideas for our strategic direction and say, does the amalgamated CEO think this is a good idea or a bad idea? Does the amalgamate, I love doing, I do that stuff all the time with the non-historical or the regular tools that are out there for people. But it's just like, I just keep thinking of ways that I would love to have access to like such a massive data, like store of data for the companies that I've been at, and just find out. So what was the C like? What were the decisions that were made at this particular time when such and such a factory blew up, or these interesting kind of instances that could teach us a lot about what we can do now when hopefully different things happen, or when you're faced with different challenges. I mean,
and if you take that same concept and you think about it through the context of risk mitigation in legal, something more proactive than reactive. Maybe one of the great examples I always like to turn to and talk about is its efficacy as a sales tool. So if you're a construction or engineering company, or a management consulting company like Deloitte, who we were talking about, and you're wanting to quickly be able to understand your history of work in a specific market, in a specific region, and then being able to pull that content together quickly, suddenly you can create that into an executive summary as part of a proposal. So again, think of it as it is a AI enabled time machine that is able to essentially go through the history of your entire organization based on what it knows, and give you that information and manipulate it into the kind of content that we all create and build coming out of AI.
Any agentic
but that's why it's called
features?
Chronicle, because it is like a time machine.
Yeah. It's brilliant. Are there any agentic developments coming on the in the product roadmap horizon, if you're able to say? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening so quickly, right? Like, I mentioned the image one as an example. That's something that just came online in the last few weeks, and probably by the time this podcast airs, there will be new ones. So certainly anyone interested, I'm sure we'll drop the link in the show notes. But if you go to historyfactory.com, you can see all about it.
Yeah. It's I think it just opens up so much to brands to understand, the value of storytelling, if nothing else. I mean, okay, I get the legal things. You can, if you have your archive set up properly, or if you have all this data available where you can go back and see, you go through all of the contracts, all of the decisions made, all of the clauses and heretofores and whereafters and whatevers, and see where there was a T that wasn't crossed. Wonderful. So you've got your compliance side. Okay. To me, the dream is the content. Like it's just like, so its impact on storytelling and on all the basic comm stuff that people are stuck with, like writing fact sheets. Okay, that's an easy one. Or, coming up with whatever proof points for this and that. But, imagine like really getting into the heart of narrative with it.
Well, and also its ability to, for instance, if you're talking about, again, connecting it to also the archaeological history. So you can ask it, Chronicle, what's your favorite object in this collection? So as you think about things like product development or nostalgia marketing or experiential marketing, all those kinds of things, it's like, tell me the 10 coolest things in your archive, from the 1960s, again, it's a time machine. It's a time machine.
Yeah. Really handy when different like design trends cycle in and out. Imagine going back to your Art Deco phase or your postmodernist phase or whatever different Bauhauses you've gotten out there. I'm just spewing things right now, but
yeah,
it is. We had this at my last company at Lixil. We had the heritage of American Standard, which had been around forever, and there was a great kind of 1930s era image, right? And you can think of the 1930s, the U.S. You can imagine it's borderline socialist, communist type stuff, right? Where it's like, work, you could see like the title could be Workers Unite, but it's not, or Plumbers Unite, but that's not what it is. It's the strength of the nation is the plumbers are the strength of a nation. I think that's even what it said. Plumbers are the strength of a nation. And you add this like picture perfect, ideal, whatever that might be at the time, plumber with a plunger on his shoulder.
Yeah, very
looked like he was ready to lead
plumber. Yeah,
whole thing, right? So, when we started thinking about an anniversary, when I was there, we were talking about remaking that image in a 2021, 22, whatever style. And at that time, AI image generators were really starting to take off, and you could take the image and manipulate it, say, okay, now redo this with except now make the plumber female, make the plumber of indeterminate ancestry and ethnicity, give me 14 different versions, and so on, right? So you can come up with some very interesting modernized campaign ideas. That was really advanced. Just even trying that and trying to get people to. I thought it was a really great way to get people used to AI as well, just to do a user generated content campaign internally where you'd submit photos or images of the plumbers or the safeguard the health of the nation or whatever it was. Now, if I had Chronicle, right? If I had Chronicle, it's bring up all the artwork from different years and different ages. And boy, would that have been a much more, I don't know, it would have been a lot more fun and probably a lot more viable as an external facing campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, you absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so where's it going then? So what you said, your philosophy as History Factory, start with the future, work back. So we've been talking about Chronicle and AI. I mean, that feels like the now. What's the future that you are working back from for History Factory so that you can get there? It's so interesting to think of it like a loop of some kind.
Yeah. Well, we have a saying of, nothing looks older faster than the future. So I don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. But I do think that what we're seeing right now with this explosion of technologies and scale and speed, I don't think it's going to look like the way people are predicting it. I'm pretty bullish that we're all still going to have jobs in 10 years. I think that the way we work is going to be really different, just like the way we work now is really different than it was 20 years ago and really different than the way we worked 20 years before that. But I do think that one of the things that is kind of an interesting paradigm is that with all of these organizations, and now increasingly, whether you're a big company or a small company, we're all kind of using and adopting a lot of the same technologies and tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a trend of the more intelligent and data rich we get, the more illiterate we become. And I think that we are about to go through a potential sort of hyper scaled sort of phase of like sameness and commoditization at scale.
Is that a cognitive offload type of a thing where we're just delegating thinking?
Yeah. And I think it's already been happening, right? Where we are producing so much content and so much data that what we're starting to really lose is context. And that I think is going to become a more understood challenge that, technology can't solve for in terms of, data analytics. It doesn't give us the context of, where we've been, why we are where we are. And I think that the organizations that are going to continue to win are going to not only be the ones who understand how to deploy these tools in the most effective way, but they're going to be the organizations that, as I alluded to before, don't lose sight of understanding really who they are, why they exist, what's made them successful, what mistakes they've made in the past, and don't become untethered to that. And I think, when we started our conversation, you talked about how different things are, but I think in a lot of ways, the organizations that are going to be the most successful are going to be the ones that don't get so distracted by how things are different and just really stay even keeled and understand that this is just the latest in a, trend that's been going on for, hundreds and thousands of years, which is, progress and innovation. Take my company as an example. We're not going to reinvent, what we do and why we do it for our clients just because of this amazing technology and this amazing change that's happening. We're going to change how we do it and what that means for our clients. But I think that that's going to be one of the really big challenges and opportunities for organizations. I think the organizations that are going to, and you and I talked about this on our podcast, I think a couple of weeks ago, was like, the organizations that think they're going to dramatically remove expertise and institutional knowledge and replace it with machines, I think it's going to be incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah. I think I call that the big oopsie is coming,
Yeah. And so I agree with you on that. So, roles are going to change as they always do. But I think that context piece and really staying tethered to who you are and where you've been is going to be more important than ever.
There's some ideas that just keep cycling back into our discussions and into our vernacular, I suppose, as marketers and communicators. And context is one of them. Context, I think it was content is king and content is whatever for a long time. And then it was, no, it's not content.
Context is queen.
Context is queen. I think Matt Sweezy wrote a book a couple of years back called The Context Revolution, or the coming context revolution. And I admit that it was so high level, like not high level as in it covered things from 30,000 feet. I mean, intellectually very, very challenging to read because it was so smart. I mean, it was so, you had to really think it through. And I think that he might have been ahead of his time a little bit. He was talking mostly within the context of Web3, at the time, right? So you can think about that. But I wonder if context is currency, then, and I think it is. I think context is currency because so much of it is out there available to anybody at the push of at the urging of a prompt. But if it is currency, then I think my final question to you before we close it out, and maybe this is a good way to close it out, is do you think companies with history, like organizations that have a rich legacy and a rich history, we've been saying that the smaller companies, the nimble companies are going to come and eat their lunch. And for some reasons they might. But do you think that they have a really big advantage now? Or there's a hidden advantage to having so much, what somebody might uncharitably call baggage, but what we'll call, content, archives, stuff?
I don't think it's that monolithic. I think that, I don't think that I mean, the reality is that when you look at the Fortune 500 as an example, right? The reality is the dominant, many of the companies now, the Fortune 500 over the last 25 years has dramatically dropped in terms of the average lifespan of those companies.
Yeah.
And
it used to be 75 years, and now it's
I don't remember the exact numbers, but 25 years ago it was like something like the average
and now it's 30 months.
Yeah, it's like the average. Yeah, right. The average Fortune 500, I think 25 years ago was something like 85, right? Yeah. And it was GE and
IBM and the blue chips.
Right. And so now that number skews way younger. It's like 35 or something. And so there's other issues to play, and the S&P obviously is dominated by 7 companies that are much younger than that. So I don't look at it necessarily that way, but I also look at it in the context of like even companies that are quote unquote younger, they're still 25, they're still 30. They still have a lot of institutional memory. I think of it less in the context of years and more in the context of where are they in their life cycle. And I think what's more kind of critical to consider is where are they in the context of their leadership. So these organizations are so big that it takes decades for sometimes you to know how they are going to endure. I mean, if you look at a company like Hewlett Packard, it took decades for that company to unravel based on what their founders had built over decades. If Apple loses its way, we still won't know, And so what I see, and I don't know if I'm directly answering your question the way you asked it, Dan, but I think that with a lot of the dominant companies right now in our economy, they haven't yet proven that they're truly built to last generationally. And that I think is not something we're going to know for a long time. But what I do know is whether you're 5 or 10 or 150, you want to be able to stay connected to who you are. And, a line I use all the time, because the word history unto itself is kind of, I guess, in a business context, it's controversial. It feels inherently backward looking. And the reality, though, is if you replace the word history with experience, it's interpreted in a completely different context. And that's really what we're talking about, right? Is organizations that are able to continue to access their memory, their experience, whatever word you want to call it. And I don't think any reasonable executive would say that they don't want to be able to access and harness that collective history, experience, data, archives, memory. All those words are essentially all kind of connected to the same concept of what makes you you and how do you communicate that and wield that and leverage that to differentiate and obviously continue to execute in the market.
It's the same thing for individuals, same thing for people, guys out there. You have domain expertise, you have however long you've been doing what you're doing. You have stuff in your head, maybe on your PC, nobody else has ever seen or that they know about or that they remember, but it's uniquely, originally stuff that you have done that you know about. And who doesn't want to tap into that, right? I mean, I think folks forget that there's a lot of value there instead of thinking, they have to always think of something new. And, it's it writ large for companies, it doesn't seem to be much different.
Right. And I think that when you look at that in the context of technology and AI specifically, the individuals and the companies that are going to build and execute the best AI are going to be the individuals and the organizations that are the experts in their domain. So just as a History Factory, I know we have created a technology and a solution and a capability that is being enabled by the technology that's been made available to us and the technical talent that we have been fortunate to invest in that have understood how to leverage that technology. But the way we're leveraging it is rooted in the collective expertise and experience and history of our talented team over decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're a small example of that. But you're going to see that happen over and over again, whether it's a big Fortune 10 company or, a mid-sized company like us. It's going to be organizations that understand how to leverage that technology in the context of their expertise.
Couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I try sometimes and to say exactly what you just said, or at least get there. I think domain expertise is the thing, and experience, shall we say, wisdom earned from experience, and just the fact that you have so much stuff that you've forgotten about that is truly remarkable. I mean, I'm maybe being generous with some people, but for the most part, those of us who have been in the world for a certain amount of time, there's some good stuff out there, and you have to find it. And I think that's a much lighter version of what companies need to do. But I am thrilled to have had you on the show, Jason. And I know we've been talking about this for years. I'm glad that we finally did it. Thank you so much for being here. Anybody wants to reach Jason, go to historyfactory.com, not thehistoryfactory.com, historyfactory.com, to learn more about the business and his company, to learn more about Chronicle. Check out Jason on LinkedIn. He does is it weekly or bi-weekly newsletter?
It's been
as often as you can.
It's been bi-weekly, but now our PR firms want me to cool that so we can work on some other media. But look me up on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
And
Jason Dressel on LinkedIn is his name will be spelled properly in the episode title. So Jason, thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.